while other 8-year-olds in Austin, Texas, giggled over spelling words on chalkboards and chased each other across sunlit schoolyards. Leela lived in a completely different world, a world of silence and electronic secrets. Her tiny room echoed only with the soft clinks of metal and the faint hiss of a soldering iron. There were no sounds of laughter, no affectionate voices calling her name. Each day played out like a monotone symphony, her small hands diligently twisting screws and soldering connections on old radios. Her mother scavenged from junkyards, while her one worn-down pencil sketched out intricate circuit diagrams on the yellowed pages of a tattered notebook. At the first light of dawn breaking over Austin's horizon, Leela would quietly follow the frail silhouette of her mother, a hard-working janitor, down the empty streets. Together, they made their way to the towering headquarters of a tech empire, where thousands of employees would soon flood in. But amidst the bustling crowd, no one ever stopped to notice the timid little girl curled up in the hallway corner. No one asked her name. No one acknowledged her fragile presence. Leela was like a tiny ghost. She existed, but went unseen. She breathed, but was never heard. Then came the day everything changed. A day that would go down in history. In just a blink, the billion-dollar tech empire crumbled under an unprecedented cyberattack. Massive screens suddenly went black. Firewalls collapsed like sand castles, and the data of millions vanished into thin air. Top-tier engineers scrambled like ants in a wildfire, sweat pouring down their faces, fingers trembling as they typed in vain. The CEO, once a towering figure who gazed down at the world from his penthouse office, now sat motionless, staring blankly at a dead screen, as if peering into the abyss of his own downfall. And in that moment of absolute chaos, when the entire tech world teetered on the edge of collapse, the girl no one remembered, the child no one trusted, became the only one who truly understood what was happening. Leela's clear eyes scanned the code, flashing across the screen, recognizing patterns and signals that even the most seasoned experts had missed. She quietly stood up, walked toward the central command console, and for the first time in her life, her soft voice rang out in the room, full of panic. "I know how to fix it." That single sentence struck like lightning through the darkness. And from that moment on, the world around her would never be the same again. While other 8-year-olds in Austin, Texas were giggling as they learned to spell on chalkboards and chasing each other under the scorching sun on the schoolyard, Leela existed in an entirely different world, a world of silence and electronic secrets. Her tiny room echoed only with the soft clinking of metal and the faint hiss of a soldering iron. There were no sounds of laughter, no familiar voices calling her name. Every day played out like a monotone symphony, her small fingers working diligently, tightening screws and soldering connections on old radios her mother had salvaged from the junkyard. Meanwhile, her one dull pencil scribbled complex circuit diagrams into the yellowing pages of a worn-out notebook. As the first light of dawn stretched across the Austin skyline, Leela quietly followed the thin, wary figure of her mother, a hard-working janitor, down the still, empty streets. Together, they headed to the towering headquarters of a tech giant, where thousands of employees would soon fill the halls. But in the hustle of the morning crowd, no one ever stopped to notice the shy little girl sitting quietly in the corner of the hallway. No one asked her name. No one even acknowledged her fragile presence. Leela was like a small ghost. She existed, but was never seen. She breathed, but was never heard. Then came the day everything changed. The day the billion-dollar tech empire collapsed in a single instant, brought down by the most devastating cyberattack in history. Giant screens suddenly went black. Firewalls crumbled like sandcastles, and the data of millions vanished without a trace. The world's top engineers, scattered in panic like ants in a wildfire, sweat pouring down their brows, hands trembling as they typed in desperation. The CEO, once proud and untouchable, gazing down from his high-rise throne, now sat frozen, his eyes blank as he stared into the lifeless screen, as if it were the abyss of his fallen career. No one had taught Leela any of this. Her knowledge was forged from old, discarded books she found in trash bins, from the broken electronic parts she collected, and most importantly, from a battered notebook left behind by a mysterious father she had never truly known. That notebook, yellowed and worn with time, held an entire universe of knowledge, intricate hand-drawn circuit diagrams, baffling mathematical formulas, and algorithms so advanced even seasoned engineers would frown in confusion. It was the only legacy her long-absent father had left behind, a roadmap into the world of electronics, and a key to understanding the man who gave her life. Every afternoon after school, a sacred ritual played out. Leela would silently hold the hand of her mother, Maria, whose tired eyes still glowed with warmth whenever she looked at her daughter, and climb aboard a rickety old bus rattling its way through the noisy streets of Manhattan. Their destination was another world altogether. The gleaming glass towers of Athercorp, giants that shimmered with light, symbols of power and wealth. The massive Athercorp logo glowed atop the tallest building, like an all-seeing eye watching over the city. This was one of the most powerful tech empires in the U.S., where the brightest minds worked to shape the future. And here, Maria worked as a janitor, cleaning lavish offices for just enough to scrape by. Leela followed behind with her tattered backpack, her treasure chest filled with salvaged parts, and that ever-present notebook. She wandered through the silent hallways and state of the art offices, their enormous screens displaying charts and endless streams of code. The sound of keyboards clicking filled the vast space, but no one noticed the small girl drifting past. Leela moved like a silent ghost, eyes sharp and observant, tracking every cable, every server blinking like digital fireflies. Sometimes she paused in front of a massive monitor, reading the cascading lines of code, like others might read a gripping novel. A hidden genius in the shadows of a giant, waiting patiently for her moment to rise. And that moment came far sooner than anyone could have imagined. It was just another ordinary evening at Athercorp, until suddenly chaos erupted. Screens across the building began flickering wildly, displaying bright red characters in some alien-like language. Sirens blared, ripping through the silence, and sending waves of panic through the facility. The unbreakable security system of Athercorp had just gone down. Mark Peterson, The arrogant and once unshakable head of cybersecurity was now drenched in sweat, eyes darting between screens. "Damn it! The firewall's down! The system's completely locked out!" "We've lost control," he shouted, voice cracking with panic. Hidden behind a janitor's cart, Leela quietly observed the chaos with eyes that sparkled like crystal. As strange, unfamiliar lines of malicious code danced across the largest screen in the room. A sudden flash of recognition lit up her mind. These symbols, she had seen them before, buried deep in her father's old research notebooks. Her father, the brilliant programmer who had mysteriously vanished years ago. There were codes exactly like this. This wasn't just a cyber attack. It was something else entirely, a personal signature, an encrypted message that only Leela could understand. In that moment, she realized she was standing at the edge of a secret far bigger than she'd ever imagined, one that reached deep into her own family's dark past. As the chaos reached its peak, and every door seemed to slam shut, Leela knew it was time to step out of the shadows. Her small figure suddenly emerged and began walking straight toward the central control deck, where Mark Peterson and the engineering team were flailing in desperation. "I can help," she said. Her voice was small, yet astonishingly clear, and it cut through the noise like a bell. Everyone turned to look. Mark Peterson frowned, clearly irritated. "Who is this kid? What could a child possibly know about? Hey! Get her out of here!" But before security could react, Leela did something no one expected. She sprinted toward the main console, her movements fast and precise. In mere seconds, she removed a few loose components, flaws that only she had noticed, and inserted a tiny homemade USB drive she had brought with her, prepared for this very moment. Her eyes locked onto the screen, fully focused, as if the entire universe had shrunk into the scrolling lines of code before her. The giant display suddenly lit up, glowing green as command lines raced across the interface at blinding speed. She's reversing the encryption," one engineer whispered, stunned. In utter silence, Leela's fingers flew across the keyboard like a ballerina in perfect rhythm. Every keystroke deliberate, every movement filled with deep understanding of a system even the adults couldn't comprehend. Bit by bit, the red alerts on the screen began to fade, replaced by a wave of pulsing green nodes. Signs that she was reclaiming control of the network, piece by piece. "I can't believe it. She's disabling them from the inside," Mark Peterson stammered, his face pale. But just as Leela was about to finish restoring the last segment of the system, a new message flashed across the screen, and it stunned everyone into silence. "WELCOME," accompanied by a familiar symbol. The logo of her father's old company, the one that had been absorbed by Ethercorp years ago, just before he vanished. This wasn't the work of anonymous hackers. It was a message, a final act of vengeance from someone who had been betrayed, used, and then erased by Ethercorp. Her father. He had embedded a backdoor, a digital kill switch, waiting silently all these years to be activated. With just a few keystrokes, Leela could have brought the entire empire crashing down. But she didn't. Staring at the screen with a gaze filled with quiet complexity, she closed the back door forever, her choice was not destruction, but love and forgiveness. As the final lines of code flashed into place, and the system fully came back online, a profound silence fell across the room. Then, all at once, it was shattered by thunderous applause, echoing down the long halls of EtherCorp, like a storm breaking after a drought. Mark Peterson, the once proud, powerful man, dropped to one knee in front of Leela. His face was no longer stern, no longer filled with doubt. Instead, there was awe, respect, and maybe even a hint of remorse. "Lila, you saved us. You saved EtherCorp. But how did you know how to do any of this?" His voice shook with disbelief. Leela didn't say much. She simply looked up at him, then down at the worn notebook in her hands, filled with old circuitry sketches and codes, passed down from a man the world had forgotten. But she never had. That notebook was her compass, her legacy, her truth. She didn't need to explain. She just knew. She belonged to that world, the world of numbers and wires, of silent logic and hidden truths. A world where sometimes the most brilliant minds overlook what only a pure heart and a curious spirit can see. A few weeks later, Leela was no longer the invisible girl, hiding in the shadows of EtherCorp. She had gone from being unseen to becoming a symbol, a source of wonder and inspiration. Recognizing her extraordinary gift, EtherCorp created a special innovation lab just for Leela. No longer confined to a dusty corner of the Lower East Side, she now had a bright, spacious room filled with cutting-edge tools, giant screens, and unlimited access to the company's top engineers, many of whom now saw her not as a child, but as a mentor. Mark Peterson stopped by often, not as a superior, but as a student, humbly listening and helping her develop groundbreaking ideas that pushed the boundaries of what even EtherCorp thought possible. But Leela wasn't the only one whose life changed. Her mother, Maria, no longer had to push that heavy janitor's cart through quiet hallways. In a gesture of deep gratitude, EtherCorp gave her the financial support she needed to finally pursue her long-held dream, a fashion design course she had quietly wished for over the years. Now, instead of mops and cleaning supplies, her afternoons were spent beside a sewing machine, sketching dresses and sewing fabrics, her eyes glowing with a new kind of joy. For the first time in her life, Leela no longer felt alone. She had found her place, a place where dreams were nurtured, where talent was seen, and where quiet brilliance was no longer overlooked. She now sat in her lab, not repairing broken radios anymore, but building something new, something far more complex, a device she believed could one day change the world. And as she looked out through the tall window, toward the night sky, where stars shimmered like sparks of possibility, she knew in her heart, "This is where I belong." We're just a small team behind this channel, and every story you see here is crafted with care, thought, and love, with you in mind. If this video touched you in any way, please like, share, and subscribe, so you won't miss the next story that might just change your day or your life.